There's a strange silence that follows your first real success. Not the applause. Not the validation. But the silence inside you. Because becoming the first one to make it doesn't feel the way you thought it would. You imagined freedom, respect, maybe even peace. But instead, you feel watched, misunderstood, and quietly alone in rooms you once dreamed of entering. And if you've ever reached a point where everything looks right on the outside, but something feels unsettled within, then this is the truth no one warned you about. The first-generation winner doesn't just build a new life. They unknowingly dismantle an old identity. And that is where the real tension begins. Because most people believe success is an addition. More money. More status. More control. But for you, it becomes subtraction. Old relationships shift. Familiar environments feel distant. Even your own patterns begin to feel foreign. You're no longer who you were, but you haven't fully become who you're meant to be. And in that in-between space, there is no map. This is where the psychological cost begins to surface. Modern culture tells you that confidence is loud. That power is visible. That attraction comes from dominance, performance, and constant self-promotion. But the truth is, most of that is compensation. What society rewards externally, often hides internal instability. You see it everywhere, people chasing validation disguised as ambition. People building identities based on approval, not truth. And when you step outside of that pattern, when you start moving differently, thinking differently, you become harder to categorize. Harder to relate to. And sometimes, harder to accept. This is where your journey quietly separates from the crowd. Because what you're going through isn't just success. It's individuation. As Carl Jung once said, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. And that's exactly what begins to happen. You start seeing patterns you never noticed before. Family dynamics. Social expectations. Invisible rules you were once unconsciously obeying. And suddenly, they no longer hold the same power over you. But awareness comes with a cost. Because once you see clearly, you can't unsee. And that clarity creates distance. Not always physical distance, but psychological distance. You sit in a room with people you've known for years, and something feels off. The conversations haven't changed, but you have. You notice the repetition. The subtle insecurities. The need for validation in every joke, every opinion, every comparison. And you realize, you used to be part of that rhythm. But now, you're observing it. Quietly. This is the first shift. The separation from unconscious identity. It doesn't feel empowering at first. It feels isolating. Because belonging was once tied to similarity. And now, you're no longer similar. But this is where real transformation begins. The second shift is more subtle, but more difficult. It's the confrontation with your own shadow. Jung described the shadow as the parts of ourselves we reject, suppress, or deny. And success has a way of amplifying it. Because when your external life expands, your internal contradictions become harder to ignore. You might notice moments of envy, even after achieving more than those around you. Moments of insecurity, despite external validation. Moments of doubt, when everything should feel certain. And that creates confusion. Because you thought success would eliminate those feelings. But it doesn't. It reveals them. As Friedrich Nietzsche wrote, he who fights with monsters should be careful lest he thereby become a monster. In other words, the more you chase power externally, the more you risk ignoring what's unresolved internally. And for first-generation winners, this becomes a defining moment. You either suppress these contradictions, or you face them. Facing them requires honesty. Not the kind you show others, but the kind you can barely admit to yourself. It means acknowledging that part of your drive came from fear. From wanting to escape something. To prove something. To finally feel enough. And once you see that, you can't build the same way anymore. Your motivation begins to shift. From proving, to understanding. From chasing, to refining. This is where the third shift begins. Detachment from external validation. Not because you don't value success, but because you no longer depend on it for identity. This is a quiet transformation. From the outside, it might look like you've slowed down. Like you're less aggressive, less visible. But internally, something far more stable is forming. You stop needing every room to recognize you. You stop explaining yourself to people who aren't ready to understand. And most importantly, you stop negotiating your self-worth. As Viktor Frankl said, when we are no longer able to change a situation, we are challenged to change ourselves. And that's exactly what happens here. You realize that external circumstances will always fluctuate. Status can rise and fall. Recognition can come and go. But your internal structure, your sense of self, that's where real stability lives. And for the first time, you begin building that instead. There's a moment that often happens during this stage. You're alone. Maybe late at night. No noise. No distractions. And you start thinking. Not about what you've achieved, but about who you're becoming. You replay decisions. Patterns. Relationships. And there's a quiet realization that settles in. You didn't just outgrow your environment. You outgrew a version of yourself. And that realization is both freeing and heavy. Because it means there's no going back. Only forward, into something unknown. This leads to the fourth shift. Integration. Not perfection. Not completion. But wholeness. You stop trying to eliminate your flaws, and start understanding them. You recognize that your ambition and your insecurity once coexisted. That your strength was often built on past vulnerability. And instead of rejecting those parts, you begin to integrate them. This is what Jung called becoming whole. Not by removing darkness, but by including it. Who looks outside, dreams, who looks inside, awakens. And awakening isn't loud. It's quiet. Subtle. Almost invisible to others. But internally, everything changes. You move differently. Not because you're trying to impress, but because you're aligned. You speak less, but with more clarity. You act less, but with more precision. And there's a presence that begins to form. Not forced. Not performed. Just felt. This is where attraction changes. People may not understand you fully, but they notice something. A kind of groundedness. A lack of need. And that absence of need is what creates real power. Because you're no longer trying to extract value from others. You're operating from your own. There's another moment that often defines this stage. You're in a group setting. People are talking, laughing, competing subtly for attention. And you're there, but not caught in it. You observe without needing to participate in the performance. And for a brief second, you see the entire dynamic from the outside. The validation loops. The insecurity patterns. And you realize. You used to need this. Now, you don't. And that realization isn't arrogant. It's peaceful. Because for the first time, your identity isn't being negotiated in real time. It's stable. This is the truth no one tells first-generation winners. Success doesn't complete you. It exposes you. It removes the distractions that once kept you from seeing yourself clearly. And in that clarity, you're faced with a deeper question. Who are you, without the pursuit? Who are you, when there's nothing left to prove? This is where most people turn back. They reattach to external goals. Find new ways to chase validation. Because sitting with that question requires a level of honesty most avoid. But if you stay, if you resist the urge to escape, something deeper begins to emerge. A sense of self not built on comparison. Not shaped by expectation. But discovered through awareness. And that's where true power lives. Not in control over others. Not in constant achievement. But in self-possession. The ability to exist, without needing to be defined by external measures. This is the existential peak. Where success meets identity. Where achievement meets meaning. And where you realize you were never chasing success. You were chasing yourself. And now, you're finally meeting that person. Not the version shaped by fear. Not the version built for approval. But something quieter. More real. More complete. So the next time you feel that silence after success, don't rush to fill it. Don't distract yourself with the next goal. Sit with it. Because that silence is where your real life begins. You don't chase. You become. You don't force. You embody. And if this resonated with something you couldn't quite explain before, then you're already further along than you think. Stay with it. And if you want more reflections like this, you already know where to find them.